Humanizing Our Differences. This is a series airing each Thursday at 7:30 p.m. for the next 4 weeks with a panel discussion. We are live streaming at the Staysh Facebook and the Staysh YouTube channel. We are also showing this on Channel 1 on Hay Communications and Huron-Tel, so we welcome our viewers there. This series is brought to you by Huron County Immigration Partnership and FOPOP Media with the generous support of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. In the studio with me is Rand Lobb, and joining by Zoom, we are pleased to have Jana Baer-Smith, the principal of Goderich District Collegiate Institute and previously of South Huron High. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. And Jana, you are in Lucan right now.
I am, yeah.
And Rand, you are here in the studio.
Nope, I'm in Lucan too. It's just a weird, there's a little trick, there's a little parallax going on. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Well, tonight, let me tell you, we are having conversations about conversations that address diversity, privilege, and the experience of newcomers with a rural and hyper-local lens. We have 4 compact chapters to show you, and we are going to chat in between them and kind of unpack them, if you will. We do invite our viewers, if you're watching on Facebook or live streaming there, to post your comments, and we'll see if we can address those. Before we get underway, though, I'd like to ask each of you a question. And Rand, let's start with you. Rand, why is it important for FOPOP Media to host programming such as this?
So if you're in the arts and you're not thinking about cultural influences and diversity and, varied opinions on any subject matter, you're not really worshiping at the foot of the right altar. In the arts, you have to be sensitive to points of view and disparate points of view and try to find some commonalities from all these points of view. So for those of us who work at FOPOP, although because of where we live, we're often old white guys or young white guys and, like yourself, a white woman, we know that we want to bring in as many different viewpoints as possible. And that helps us, and it helps any kind of art that you're working on.
You're a former educator, and we are joined by an educator. And Jana, I'm wondering, with that lens, why is it important to have a rural lens as we have these conversations?
I think that these conversations are essential whether you're rural or urban. But when I think about being a rural educator and having grown up in a rural community in Nova Scotia, these conversations are essential primarily because when we look at a lot of our Canadian rural communities, they are not diverse. And yet we have lots to offer, and opening up our communities to diversity is going to allow our rural communities to flourish, to grow, and that's going to be essential to be able to encourage diversity, to encourage people to come and help our communities to grow. And having the conversations will break down some historic barriers that I think can be found. We were talking earlier, right, about some seniors who maybe are stuck in their ways, and some of those patterns end up continuing in communities. And it's time to break those patterns because our communities are great places to live, and we should be encouraging everybody to be coming to our communities, being part of them.
That's terrific. And what I'd like to do right now is show you the first chapter, a very compact chapter that I think sets the table for our conversation throughout the evening. So we'll watch the short chapter. I'm really pleased that I get to introduce you both to a good friend of mine, Dr. Nita Tyler Mosby. And she's very well known in the United States, in the Colorado area. She's considered to be one of the top 25 African-American women focused on diversity. And she's also the chair of the Denver Foundation, which is where I met her. She really does set the stage. Let's take a watch, and when we come back, let's delve in. are some of the tenets of a welcoming, inclusive community? What does it look like, feel like, act like?
You know, it's a complicated question, but a great one to be asking, especially in a moment and a movement like this one. You know, I really do believe what we're talking about here is on a spectrum. I think what often happens is we center on one word, but the reality is there is a continuum that we're working in. And that continuum that I use most often is there are things about what we're talking about that are about diversity. Some things, to your point, are about inclusiveness. Some things are about equality and some things are about equity. So I like the interplay of these words. So to go to your question, what can we be to, or what can we do to be more welcoming? A part of it is understanding the interplay of those four words. So to be welcoming means you have to acknowledge diversity. You can't say things like, I don't see color, or we're all the same. Those kind of things actually fly in the face of what it means to be welcoming. I actually want you to see my diversity, and I want to see yours. And those differences are not problematic. Those differences really are the gifts that we all bring to community. So a part of the answer to your question is to be welcoming means to affirm and to acknowledge that we really are different, and to start to see the beauty and the richness of what that brings to our lives and to our communities. The reality is we do see difference, and it's okay. What we're uncomfortable with is what those differences have caused. That's what people are afraid to talk about or contemplate or go face to face with. How do we build relationships with one another, value the differences that we all bring to our communities and to different tables, and at the same time reconcile what was institutionalized in our country, in our history, in a way that we all end up thriving in our systems. I do believe it's also important, as we honor the beauty of our differences and just honor each other in community, that we create spaces where we can talk about hard things, maybe even screw up and not get it completely right or say the wrong thing, that we get to do that in spaces that don't have judgment and critique in them. If we're always in spaces where we're judging and critiquing one another, we actually aren't in relationship. And it really compromises our ability to be welcoming when we can't be in relationship. So spaces filled with grace are philosophically what I stand for, and I try to promote everywhere I go. And it doesn't mean that we don't get at the real issues, but it does mean we do it in the spirit of allowing people to learn and grow and fall down and get back up together.
It's so helpful that you just said that, because I think and I hear individuals say, I'm scared or nervous that I will get it wrong, that I will fumble. And sometimes there are folks who have very little awareness, and that's okay. They're trying, or maybe they don't even know yet.
There's also a spectrum of where we are on this continuum of this diversity, equity, inclusion, equality work that we're talking about. Some people are asleep. Some people are ultra awake. I mean, it's just, we're on a spectrum. And what we have to do in that spectrum is, one, acknowledge that everybody's in a different place for whatever the reason might be. And two, not to villainize people on different parts of the spectrum. If you happen to be this ultra woke person that's aware and experienced and all of that, it is not our job to then critique the people that aren't there. I actually will say to you, my belief system is, I think we claim these titles of wokeness prematurely sometimes. Sometimes, unless you've had a real lived experience in what we're talking about, you might not be as awake as you think you are. I still think we all have opportunities to fill in the blank for each other on lived experiences. When we go backwards in time, back to when the diversity movement started, when we were just defining what diversity meant, 70s and early 80s, one of the faux pas that was made back then is the way that we defined the word diversity. What I would want people to know in communities across the country is that diversity also includes white people. So if you identify as a white person, you are not void of or outside of the definition of diversity. I want you to get right in there because you're in it. And so I'm saying that to the audience because until we see ourselves in the definition of diversity, sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around diversity when it comes to other people. So you got to get in it because you are in it. And when we all see ourselves in that definition of diversity, which simply means difference, then I think we're better poised to understand each other. One small thing we can all do that might change the course of this entire conversation, it is correct the use of the word diversity and be explicit about what diversity you're talking about. Oftentimes we're talking about racial ethnic diversity, and we're talking particularly about communities of color, indigenous communities, Black communities. That's what we're actually talking about, but we never really say that. We just say diversity.
Right.
So
Code word.
Code word. So the more we can get explicit about what we're talking about, it makes a big difference. I'm always explicit about the what when I'm talking about diversity, but our charge here is in the spirit of being inclusive, we've got to get everybody in the definition of diversity, and then we can all be explicit about what components of diversity we're talking about.
Do you find that language can be a barrier? People are worried as words evolve, terms evolved, preferred words and terms evolved. How does that play into things? Because again, so people are afraid of fumbling.
Yes, I do find that it complicates things because people are afraid, or they're afraid that what they're going to say is irrelevant or offensive because they're not keeping up with the evolution of language. So I do find that that can be a speed bump across all kinds of communities and all kinds of people keeping up with the word. So the advice that I always give is just pay attention to language. Try to keep your eye on how language is evolving. Know that language sometimes can be nuanced. Sometimes you can go to one community and you have your own sort of nomenclature for how you say things. And then you might go to another community and there's a different way to say things. And so just keep your eye on what your community's language and patterns are, make sense, and to keep yourself educated because words do change over time. I'm a person that studies that a lot too, that trying to keep up with how words are changing over time and phrases has been work for me as well, but I think it's an important thing for us to do. But don't get caught up in, oh my goodness, I might not have the right word, therefore I'm not going to say anything. And don't be so afraid that you are going to make a mistake that you actually do make a mistake because you don't say anything.
I think people hear these big concepts such as inclusion, diversity, equity, microaggressions, all these, and they don't understand them. They're just a barrier. And you just seem to simplify it down to the most basic understanding of be interested in others, have a relationship, be real.
Yeah, that's all it is. Diversity is about difference. That's all. Inclusion is about what are you going to do with those differences? How are you going to leverage all of that beautiful difference that you have? Equality is about access and level setting, bringing one group up to the same level as somebody else. And equity is about interrogating your own systems so that you might create systems where everybody in the system gets exactly what they need to thrive, which might mean we don't all get the same thing. That's all those 4 words mean.
Welcome back. We just watched the first chapter of Humanizing Our Differences with Dr. Nita Tyler Mosby. And you can catch her TED Talks online. I really encourage them. I want to welcome everyone who's watching on both Hey and Here in Town, Channel 1, and also on Staysh and YouTube. I'm watching people watching us, and I see a nice post here from Catherine Creary saying, such an important conversation to be having. Looking forward to listening and learning. Well, I am too, and I want to turn to both of my co-hosts tonight. Jana, if I can ask you, what really struck you out of this leadoff?
It's a really good question because the entire segment I find to be very, very powerful and speaks to me in many ways. So maybe I'll just touch on a couple of things. The first is the language of spaces filled with grace. And when I think about spaces filled with grace, I think about the schools that I am lucky enough to lead. And the idea that we are allowed to learn and grow and fall down and get back up together again. And that is what I would hope that we could do in our school settings, to be able to have these spaces filled with grace and allow students to recognize, and teachers and all staff, that it's okay to get it wrong and we're going to learn together. The other piece that resonates with me is you are not as awoke as you think you are. And I think that's really important. There's so much for us to learn. And even if you're embedded in the work, I personally am learning to sit with what makes me uncomfortable and start really examining why it is that might make me feel uncomfortable, identify my bias, name it, and try to work through it. So I thought that was key. And then the last piece, because I'm always thinking about my students and how best to serve them. And we talk a lot about being explicit with what we teach. And when it comes to anti-racist education, it's essential to be explicit and being able to name what diversity is and being able to name the language is going to be key for students to be able to understand what it is that we're talking about, what is the issue, and how they can be anti-racist, proactive within their own lives. It really is, it was a fantastic episode, honestly.
Yeah, spaces filled with grace. That really spoke to me as well, Jana. I'm going to ruminate on that one for quite some time. Rand, if I can turn to you, what struck you?
The first thing that hit me is, so coming from a place of privilege, being a white male who grew up in a white community, you want to be in a learning posture. You want to be thinking about listening rather than saying. And listening to her speak made me think about what I would perceive in myself as wokeness by being sensitive to others' needs means that I have to push away some ego stuff and be wrong and say, hey, I'm wrong about this, but here's what I think, and take whatever comes back as fair. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So if you were a black person, maybe in a white community surrounded by white culture, your blackness is overt all the time, and you have to think about it. So you have a weight on you of having to have a conversation or be a spokesperson for a race that you are just part of by birth, and that we need to think about that and think about what our curiosity and what our learning involves. And often that means shutting up, sitting back, and just trying to pick up what someone else is putting out there for you. And it's hard when you feel like, yeah, I'm an ally, I'm supportive.
Yeah, I thought that was a great thing. Before we showed that episode, Jana, Rand turned to me and said, 3 white people hosting a show. and that it meant so much to me when Nita said, you're in this. Yeah. You're in this. We're all in this. It just means different. We're all different. And I remember a time when I served with Nita on the board of the Denver Foundation. There was an older white man, and he was nervous about this. And he felt like the conversation didn't include him. And Nita made so certain that he knew, that he was aware, he was central to the conversation. He was as important to it as anyone else, that it included everyone. I really appreciated that.
I think my problem is I want to have that conversation too enthusiastically to try and show that I don't have a problem. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's another kind of, probably an irritant of its own. If you're always wanting to be in the mix and say, I'm here to be supportive, just, okay, calm down.
And it
Stop
can be
talking.
uncomfortable, right? I want to ask you each this question, and maybe Jana, going back to you. So I have to share with you, as we were putting together this program, I actually had a broken wrist. And Jana, I know you just had a recent fall and you've broken your tibia. And I can tell you, wearing a cast, and I think you could say this too, at best, it's awkward. Most likely, it's uncomfortable. And at its worst, it's absolutely distracting and overwhelming. That's how some people feel having these conversations. At best, it's awkward. Most likely, it's uncomfortable. How do we help people be okay being uncomfortable, that it's okay? You're going to come out the other end healed.
You just have to be able to be wrong and you're not defending something, right? I have nothing to defend, then I'm fine. I can have a conversation with anybody about anything. But if I'm defensive, I can't. I don't know. What do you think, Jana?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about being open and being able to have conversations without judgment and being able to, I think for me, it's silence is deafening, right? Silence, if we're not having the conversations, then we're avoiding the important work that needs to happen. And we're allowing systemic racism and overt racism to happen by not having those conversations. The silence is going to cause more harm. Having the conversation allows for us to be allies, allows for us to learn from each other and to grow from each other. And sure, they might be hard, but it's about being humble and being vulnerable and recognizing we don't understand everybody's lived experience, but being curious about each other and being open to that.
It's really great to be with two educators, because curiosity is what we talk about with education, to be curious and to grow and to learn. And this is about curiosity about each other and to form relationships. So again, I'm really glad that we got a chance to hear from Nita. I think I love the state of grace. I think she brings personally a lot of grace to the conversation.
Yeah, she kind of gives us permission to say things. I don't know if you guys are doing this, but when I'm talking about things like this, I keep thinking, did I say something stupid? Did I say, like, you just keep doing that? Mm-hmm. And she sort of gives us permission to go there.
Yep.
And it would be better if a person of color was here to sort of say, sort of help us through this in some way, but we had that through her, so that was nice.
It was a great gift that she gave us. Well, I'm going to show you the next chapter. And we're going to hear a slightly different perspective. We're going to hear from some local folks. We're going to hear from Mayor John Grace and a business owner in Bayfield, Leanne Kavanaugh. So again, take a listen and we'll come back and delve.
It's important that we have these conversations at the community level, because I feel over the last couple of years we struggle with this. We really do. And it's important to have the conversation of diversity, inclusion, and racism. They may be difficult conversations, but they need to happen. There has to be a concentrated effort. And it starts with being open and creating policies, whether it's in HR and some of our corporations and our municipalities, to how we deliver services, how inclusive we are when we deliver services at the municipality. Will that filter into some of the corporations that are in our communities?
What is the economic imperative of diversity? Why does that matter in a community?
Well, I think what really matters is that for us, for specifically myself, because I'm in economic development as far as tourism is concerned, we want everybody to feel comfortable coming to the area. Mm-hmm. So we want everybody to take a look at our messaging, and go, okay, I can see myself going there. That looks like a place that's friendly. It looks like a place that I can see myself visiting. And then in the summer, we have so much diversity and it's so beautiful. And it's hard for people who don't come during the summer to see that there really is such a big change during that tourism season. So we just need to keep that messaging really open and inclusive.
Because if we don't understand diversity and we don't practice it and we don't engage or encourage it, I think more and more we're seen as a closed community. And if we want to be part of this 21st century, we have to be open and engaged in that whole process. And it enriches all of us. Diversity is enrichment to our community and to ourselves individually.
Is there a difference between, we often say, being a welcoming community and being an inclusive community? Are those one and the same, or do they show up differently?
I think it's steps. I don't consider Goderich to be inclusive yet. I think we're starting to be a more welcoming community. I don't think that I would look at it, it's not something against the community, but I think it's a learned behavior. And we as community leaders need to continue these conversations, and we will get to the point of where we are very inclusive. But this doesn't happen overnight.
Being a welcoming community and being inclusive are two totally different
That's right.
things. Saying, come visit us is not the same message as saying, come live here.
That's right.
You know, come be my neighbor, come,
right.
you know, work in my community.
That's right.
I think those things are different, and I'm not sure that people are comfortable moving from one, come visit and spend money in our community, to come live here. Well, COVID kind of shone the light on our racism in Huron County, because all of a sudden it was like, well, I don't want people to come here because I don't want people to come from the city. I know they're from the city because they're not white.
That's correct.
And you hear things like, I saw a van pull up and all these people got out and they were from Brampton, or they were from Toronto, or they were from Peel. It's like, well, okay, how did you know where they were from?
And we've seen a lot of that this summer on our beach. Just those very scenarios that you're talking about every day. And I was questioned by some families that were visiting our community. Why is this? And it was almost to the point of embarrassment. Well, it was embarrassing, where people would take pictures of them or video them. And that is disturbing. So I know we have some work to do, and I'm not afraid of the work. But I know that we have it, and we have to recognize it, and we have to deal with it.
Every conversation that we have that's an issue within Huron County, specifically employment and housing, is going to filter down to a possible racial issue.
Yes.
And you don't want to think that way, because I feel like we have an inclusive community. When I work with people and I work with the municipality and I work with the county, and I often feel like we're all on the same page, but there is just this tiny undercurrent of, I'm comfortable with the way things are, and I'm not comfortable with the possibility of change, and I'm not sure how to vocalize or sit with that. Understanding, talking to people, and finding out, where's the fear coming from? So do you sit down with someone and say, okay, John, I understand you're upset about, the beach this summer, and that you didn't get to take your family to the beach because there was all these people from the city. Why don't you explain to me how you got to that point? And maybe somewhere in those conversations, you can filter out this fear that really is kind of the backbone of the racism issue. So
once everyone understood who their neighbors were, and that we're all the same, we put on our pants one leg at a time, and it's exposure and communication, and that we're all in this canoe paddling the same way, or we're going to become closed communities. And closed whether it's elitist or whether it's white or whether it's, there's all sorts of different contexts that you could play there.
What's your advice for communities, those who are maybe ahead of an organization, nonprofit, local municipality? What can they do, leaders?
I always say to organizations, don't do performative work, meaning don't let peer pressure make you do something. Listen to what your heart is saying to you. I still do believe the heart plays a big role in this work. And then make a conscious decision about where you will focus this work. Again, equity, equality, diversity, inclusion all have an interplay, but they're not the same things. So making a decision about the what you want to focus on would be really important. Some communities are focusing on diversity, and some communities are doing equity work.
Is my voice directly included on committees, etc.? So are you trying to figure me out, or are you trying to include me? Because I can maybe shortcut that a bit for you. And also they said, I do appreciate that you're taking the effort to figure it out, but you can ask me too, and I want you to ask me. So where are we in terms of inclusion and representation that way?
You're inclusive in the sense that you want to make friends, be neighbors, get people on, be like, you know what, you're new to town. Do you want to be on the Lions? Do you want to, be on the Optimists? Here are the service clubs that are available. We'd love to get you involved. Not, can you explain to us what it's like being a minority moving to,
Yes.
a rural Ontario? Can you please be our poster child for a not white person in here, in your county?
Are they the token?
Oh, it's just like the most uncomfortable thing for me.
Leanne, what you just said there was what I heard is, I don't want to be, don't talk to me about what it's like to be. I just want to be. So how can I participate? What are you going to do with your time on stage to influence and to invite people on board and to encourage them to make authentic, actionable movements forward? What can you do individually? What can you do? What can I count on each of you for?
So obviously housing, space, how do we attract people to come and live in Bayfield? Who are we trying to attract? Even in our logo that we created for the Bayfield Secondary Plan, do we have diversity in that logo? Does it show, all kinds of people, not just, white people? This is what we want Bayfield to look like. So I have the opportunity to continue that conversation on that level. Obviously, on all the boards, little reminders about language. What language are we using? Is that outdated language? Do we know what language we should be using? How can we get the right resources to come in and give everybody, a little tutorial about what is welcoming language? If we have every meeting that we have is recorded. So if you have a county meeting recorded or a municipal meeting recorded, and we're still using outdated language, and you can watch those meetings on YouTube, does that tell people that we're inclusive? It doesn't. So how do we make all of it? It's just such a big package. So just keeping those conversations going. On a day-to-day basis, I'm at my counter. I get to speak to every visitor. I obviously make them feel like this is a great place to be, that we love that they come to visit. We would love them to live here. And they do want to. Especially with COVID, people are working from home. You can live in a rural community and still work in a city.
That conversation needs to start with the leaders in the community. We need to have these conversations at council. We need to have them with our staff. We need some training so we understand. And it's even how you interpret and how you deliver customer service in a very diverse cultural community. It's different. Do our retailers know it and understand it?
I just think there's so many opportunities for education, and I think that's something that as leaders in our communities we could investigate and push for, education for retailers, education for municipal staff, education for our counselors. I just think that would be such a great first step to really get people comfortable just in talking to each other. Because I do think that there is a fear that if you start a conversation that you may say something wrong. Maybe some people have never even left Huron County.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's
Yeah.
fine, and not everybody has those opportunities available to them
That's
to
right.
leave and experience diversity. So I think just having that understanding that things that are different create an element of fear, and removing that fear, removing the shame, again, allows for growth.
With acknowledging we don't know everything, that we will step on ourselves, over ourselves. And I want to thank each of you for your vulnerability in having this conversation and acknowledging I don't have the answers, but I'm passionate about taking this forward and the importance. And it's evident the passion that you both have for this. Welcome back, everyone. That was segment 2 with Mayor John Grace and Leanne Kavanagh. And Leanne is both shop bike in Bayfield and also on the Huron Chamber of Commerce. They did put themselves out there and they got at it a bit, and let's unpack it. I want to let you know that you can comment online. People are. So one of the comments we had, and I think Mayor John did a good job of addressing it, which is what are municipal leaders and the county, et cetera, doing to educate themselves and to be more inclusive? And I would extend that out to business. And John answered and said, you know, we need to do more. We need to work with our staff, and it's a beginning, but the recognition is probably the first stage. Rand, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Janet. What stood out for you?
Well, it's the difference between seeing something that's change as frightening and seeing it as an opportunity. And Leanne kind of hit that pretty nicely, that there's a certain amount of fear. You don't want, what if I don't know what my town is going to look like or whatever? That makes some sense for a certain way of thinking, but there's another way of thinking where you would see all the opportunities that come from that. Again, when you work in the arts, you're often in that sense of uncomfortability and having to learn and grow and change. So maybe it's easy for me, but other kinds of people, that sounded like I was patting my own back. That's not what I meant. You have a certain kind of job and this is how things are. It can be harder to see change as opportunity. And it makes sense. I get why people would have that.
That's good. Now, Jana, as you were listening, what came up for you?
The same thing in the idea of opportunity as well. But one of the things I think that's standing out to me when you talk about these two community leaders being willing to be vulnerable, and you can sense a little bit of discomfort around the conversation. And I think that's what makes that segment important. To recognize that the mayor has maybe a little bit of discomfort about the conversation, and that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to provide for a diverse and equitable community, whether that's Bayfield, Goderich, South Huron. And the conversations have to happen at council. They have to happen at school boards. And we have to be able to recognize that we are anxious, we are nervous about the conversations, mostly because we don't want to misstep, but maybe because we don't understand too. And I think that's what comes out is here are two people who have influence, and they're being bold enough to be able to have that conversation here. And that's a starting point, and hopefully other people will hear them.
That's a great observation. It is a starting point, and I think we are too hard on ourselves sometimes, that we have to get to the end line, the goal line. This is going to be a journey, and we have to start where we're at. And I think they did put themselves out there. It is bold, and leadership needs to do that in all organizations, Rand.
It's awkward to talk about these things because there's a little executor in your brain saying, don't screw up, don't screw up, don't screw up. And if you're a mayor or a community member who has a business, you have a lot of things at stake. Just in general, you have things at stake about who you are and how you fit into the world around you. So you don't want to say something stupid inadvertently. You don't want to show ignorance. You really want to always put the best foot forward.
Well, Rand, I'm gonna get a little full pop media on you here. We think a lot about brand and image and how we show up, and we all want to show up a certain way. Businesses want to show up a certain way. Communities want to show up a certain way. So when we talk about welcoming versus inclusive, there's a difference, and they were really grappling with that. It's one thing to be welcoming; it's another to be inclusive. What did you both think of that delineation?
Why doesn't Jana hit that first?
Okay, let's go to Jana.
I think it's really easy to be welcoming because I think being welcoming can almost be artificial. It's, it's words, but to be inclusive, it's actions. It's really stepping up and making sure that people belong, have a voice, that their voice is heard, respected, and honored, and that change happens that change happens because of that person's voice. I think being welcoming comes with being able to say, hey, welcome to my business, please grab a coffee. But being inclusive means that people belong to a community and see themselves reflected in that community. And that's hard work in rural communities.
We heard a little bit from Leanne that way, such as, hey, join Lions with me, be part of the community, be part of the influence. That's inclusive.
That's the difference.
That's
you
right.
can be welcoming. You're saying to someone, this is my place, welcome to my place.
Right.
Or you can say, this is our place, you're here too.
And we've all moved around, the three of us. We've lived in different places. We know the difference, right? I think we all watching know the difference.
Yeah, welcoming is shallow or can be shallow, and inclusion is deep. It should be deep.
And maybe a way, this is a very universal concept, and we think of open community, closed community. We were dishing before the show started, and Jana, you were sharing coming to Goderich, to GDCI as the new principal. It wasn't just welcoming, it was inclusive.
Absolutely. And I want to cycle back just a little bit because you talk about being closed, and having lived, I've lived in about 15 different communities, and small rural communities can be very closed. And even if you are a white female entering a community, that if you didn't grow up in it, it can be hard to make yourself feel like you are included in that community. You can't always be seen as, in the East Coast, it's you're from away, right? And you'll always be from away, even if you've lived there for 30 years. And so there's something to really, in rural communities, to open the doors a little bit, to not be closed in that way. And that's what GDCI is a fascinating school community, because it is definitely welcoming, and when you come through the doors, you feel that way. But there's an inclusivity there that I felt immediately, and it's the inclusivity of, here's what we can offer you as our principal. Here's what we can do, and let us show you these things. But also reaching out to me of what can you offer to our school community? What gifts do you bring to us, right? And so it's being able to honor each other's gifts and being able to provide them and then provide back to me as well. And they are remarkable like that right now. So I feel really blessed to be working in that community.
It feels like we're redefining the way that Nita would have us redefine the word diversity, which is valuing differences, which is what we're talking about.
Even if you're just being a transactional person, you can get personal value from those differences, right? Yeah. Like, we need diversity in that sense. Like Jana coming to GDCI. GDCI needs a new principal as much as the principal needs GDCI, and that realization transactionally should inspire a certain amount of positivity as well, I would hope, anyway.
Well, I'm excited to introduce you to the third chapter. This series, this first segment, evolves. We started with laying the groundwork with Nita. Yeah. We heard sort of our leaders, some of our community leaders and business leaders, setting a stage of trying to diagnose what to do. Now we're going to hear from some newcomers, and newcomers who help newcomers. We are going to hear from Gemma Mendez-Smith, and Gemma's with the 4-County Labor Marketing Planning, and Nev Ibrahim with Michael's Pharmacy in Bayfield. So take a listen. We'll come back and we'll chat about that.
This great country can be even greater if it does exactly what you said a minute ago. If it really starts to explore what welcoming looks like, what inclusion looks like, what diversity and difference brings us. It's just a great manifestation of all of those elements to me. So I just couldn't be more proud.
When we decided, when the idea sparked in our head to come to Canada, we were not back in Egypt, but we were starting a family. And we thought, okay, let's just try a wonderful new country. In Saudi Arabia, you cannot really actually, you're always like on a visa extending. Back home wasn't really, it's great, but it was not what at that time, it was very uncertain to start a family. So we thought, okay, let's go there and decide which country is wonderful. And Canada came first. We did a research and was everything we liked except the snow or hearing about the cold. although it was exciting, but we liked it that it was exciting till you try it, right? But just first of all, like how you're respected as a human. It doesn't matter your like what we read is not, it doesn't matter your religion, it doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter like, you know, your gender. You are respected. It was number one. That it was at that time, 26 years ago. I didn't go back to any statistics right now, but it was one of the best lifestyles you could have in the world. So we thought we can try. It was not all what we like, you know, thought is going to be great, but we loved that. We loved a new start, fresh, like a fresh start anyway. We thought that the kids, like our baby that was expected, which is Elizabeth now, like we did see how more opportunities is going to be there for her. And then we knew it's going to be hard first, but at one point with hard work, you could be rewarded. So we had this hope always. We never had a regret point at that time, even when it was really tight. So we started to work hard, right? On your English, his license, having a baby, all of this stuff.
Now, Gemma, if I were to ask you, is this a familiar story to you? People arrive, you have hopes, you have dreams, you have expectations, and sometimes they're met, sometimes there's some little plot twists in there. What do you see when you see newcomers?
Absolutely, Roz. And my story is a little bit different in the sense that I came and as a 19-year-old. I came as a 19-year-old to be a nanny. And so that's how I entered Canada. And I wasn't really supposed to stay. I was doing the usual teenage rebellion, time to get away from mom and dad and do something different. But then it turned out to be a year. I was supposed to be here for 1 year, and quite a number of years later, more than Nev, I've been in Canada, and it's been quite a journey. And so the idea was there were no real expectations. When you come as a 19-year-old with no ties to, Nev, you had a child, you were already married, or you're having a child, already married, coming with business ideas. I had none of those. I just wanted, life was open for me. But the one thing that I know that I can relate to you directly is hard work, you get the rewards. And so that's the thing that I know that one of many things that we have in common. Hard work, we're ready to do the hard work, we're ready to do what it takes to get to those goals and dreams that we've set for ourselves.
And share with us, Gemma, where you emigrated from.
I came from Trinidad and Tobago. So, and I didn't have quite the experience as Nev. I did have an uncle and his family here. And so I came to that point where I did have family, but the job of being a nanny, is very interesting. And so I did go through that. But you know, what was really exciting for me is that the possibility of being able to stay in Canada as a permanent resident and then become a citizen was real coming through that program. And how am I going to make it work here in this big land of Canada? And I wanted to be successful. I didn't know what success looked like at that time for me. I hadn't identified it, but I knew that I wanted it. And so I followed those paths that were opened for me and lit for me, and here I am.
So it just goes to show that we all have dreams and hopes and possibilities, and you came fresh, you know, like just so happy and young, and I'm going to change the world, and here you are, and Nev, you and Michael strike out with a new one on the way. And so let's fast forward a bit. Did you have any roadblocks? Was there at any time when you came more into the rural setting? How was that?
So when we came to Godrich, it was people were nice, the smile all the time in the street, which is you don't find in Toronto usually. And this was, you could be living in an apartment building, going up and down with the same people in the elevator every morning, and hardly somebody acknowledged you in the warm way you get acknowledged here. On the same time too, you get looked at people wonder about you a little bit.
A healthy curiosity, right? A healthy curiosity.
Very much. We were very famous from day one, and we didn't know anybody because let's face it, in a small community, if you don't know the person, you know about them, you know their family, you know their uncle, you have worked with their grandma at one point, but here we are coming out of nowhere. So it took some time to break into this, to get in, to break into the fabric, even with your neighbors and stuff, they will, kind of, doesn't, at that time, 24 years ago, it took some time to acknowledge us a little bit. But once you're there, you're loved, you're accepted right away. It just took some time, you know, that you are okay, okay person. And then you are accepted with all, at that time, we didn't have any family around. Both our parents were still back home. And so our neighbors became grandparents to the kids. And it was amazing. But it took almost a couple of years to even for my neighbors to say good morning. Big smiles, but you can say they are really kind of wondering why you're here.
Gemma, if I were to turn to you, how do you find living in a more rural setting or being in a rural setting?
Well, I chose to be in a rural setting. We didn't come for a job. My husband and I, after we were married around 10 years, we had 3 children. We realized that we both did not want to live in the city. We lived in KW, and so we decided to move into the rural community. And we lived on a farm up until maybe a year ago. So we didn't just go rural, we really went rural. And but one of the things that we made sure that, and we knew that we were going to be the only people that were different in the community that we chose to move to. And so we made sure that even before we moved, while we were getting keys for the place and so on, we went around and introduced ourselves to the neighbors, and we told them who we were, that we had children and the ages and, you know, so on, and the type of work that we did. And at that time, I still worked out of town, so I was driving quite a distance for work every day. And so the neighbors were really important to us. The other thing that we made sure that we did was we immediately injected ourselves into what was happening at school. So we were on the parent council, we were on the breakfast club, we would volunteer for everything that was happening where my husband, he worked from home, so he had a little bit more freedom to be there. But whenever I could have the chance of being off work and going and volunteering, we made sure that we did those things, because we felt that part of our responsibility moving into that community was to make sure that people knew us, knew who we were, and were familiar with our family. And certainly, similarly to Nev's experience, but more quickly than 2 years, Nev, our immediate neighbors took us in as family right away. Interestingly enough, I found that the maybe a couple of days after we'd moved in, one of the other neighbors came over and said, "We're having this thing. You're part of the community now. We want you there." Unfortunately, we'd already had plans for the long weekend, but
You were included. You were included.
exactly. It was an amazing gesture to us, because it wasn't, oh, we'll wait to get to know them for a few years before we invite them. We were immediately included. And I think those are the benefits of being in that rural small community, because people are curious. They want to know who you are. And so if you are also open, they will, then you build that bond and that relationship for sure.
Do you welcome the curiosity? Do you welcome people being interested in, your traditions and your cultures? Is that something, what would you say to people?
Like, out of experience, because we were really new to Canada too, like we were really new. So we didn't know much about the culture as well. Now when I talk with, now I have experience, I lived in both worlds, right? So when I talk with, want to help somebody, I ask them, people will be curious, please tell them who you are. Like that will, you need to give them this, kind of, they are curious, but it takes two. Like with Gemma, she was willing and she had enough experience and confident, I have to say confident as well, to go around and saying, hey, like we are here, we're part of the community. For us, we were still like tiptoeing where we go, right? So it was, but of course, if we had, and we didn't have any mentoring as well. Like, this is great when you have mentoring around. Like the only person we knew is Michael's store manager as a name. So it was really, it's great to find this, like if I am getting the chance to give my experience somebody, yes, I will tell them, please, talk about your family, don't be shy, don't be scared to say the English and say, like, to talk speak in English and still saying wrong stuff and ask the people to correct you. Like, it takes two, for sure. Like it takes both sides of and I don't blame people for being, curious or kind of cautious a little bit, because, you need to know who is in your community as well, right? So, yeah.
And for me, I'm a person who loves stories, so I just enjoy hearing people's stories, and to me that's exciting. So I probably am someone who's very curious and can't wait to understand, because I think that's what bonds us, is our shared stories. And that was the third chapter of Humanizing Our Differences, the newcomer experience. And we were with Gemma and Nev, and boy, I enjoyed chatting with them, and so much so we're going to come back to them in chapter 4. But Jana, if I can go to you, you've moved around, we've talked, you've moved a lot. You've been the curiosity in a community, especially I'm thinking out in Nova Scotia, where you probably stood out a little bit. How did that resonate for you?
Well, it's interesting because I was very intentional in embedding myself in a community, an African Canadian community that I didn't know a lot about. But when I think about that, I tried to embed myself in the community and maybe stood out. I also really always tried to recognize my white privilege, because in Canada, that's what I have. So even if I were to be the only white person in a community, I still have not experienced the types of challenges that a newcomer to a community who is BIPOC will experience. And when I was listening to this segment, that's what I was going to say to you, Roz. Like, when you moved into a new community, did you ever have to be so conscientious about how you were going to approach that community? When I hear Gemma talk about recognizing that she and her family were different, and that she had to then take a step that maybe you or I wouldn't do in a new community, we wouldn't have to be so aware of our difference. And I think that that's sad to me, in that she had to be so aware of that she had to make those conscious choices to introduce herself to others because she's different.
Very intentional, you're right. She was very intentional. They talked about the hard work, Rand. When you listened, what stood out for you?
The extrusion of risk-taking beyond the envelope of time that you would expect you to be taking risks. When you move to a new community, there's a time of tension and concern. I mean, I lived in Germany for a year with my family, and we were odd for a while, but that goes away. But if you look physically different, it probably lasts far longer and it probably keeps coming back up. Yes, we're different. Yes, we're different. Like, every conversation is predicated for a while, I would think, for too long on that difference. And you might want to move past that. You might get tired of it. It might make you kind of circle in and be insular. And that's the opposite of what you really need, in a way. You want to be able to take those risks, but we've dragged that risk-taking out by making it harder maybe sometimes for people to mesh.
You said you were odd for a while, Rand. I have to ask, did it stop?
Roz, I'll tell you, no.
No. What really struck me too was how hard they worked, how again intentional they were, how thoughtful they were, and that they saw it as a relationship, and that it takes two. And the ownership is what I really saw. They took such ownership, and this was a new beginning for people. You think about, you're moving to Germany, you're going to Nova Scotia, I have moved to the States, my partner's moved to New Zealand. Again, probably pretty safe spaces comparably. But what a leap of faith to go and not have, as you say, mentors or people to rely on, and to have such ownership, Jana. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's what really stood out to me, was that the relationship piece. And then when I heard the word mentor, and I thought, that's it. Like, that's what our communities can do. That's what our schools can do. We need to be intentional. We need to be intentional in providing newcomers those mentors, so that they can, that they're not the ones who have to always be intentional, and that they're not the ones always having to navigate this without somebody alongside of them. So I love that idea of mentorship.
I did too, Rand.
It made me think of the necessity for places where there is engagement by the structure of the place, like a restaurant, where someone puts up a restaurant and maybe they have a Lebanese background, like in Zurich, I believe. And so there's an automatic engagement position. And in a lot of communities, there are fewer of those, than there used to be. There would have been service clubs or maybe churches or whatever. Do we have those now? And as Jana says, the school acts as a really critical one of those. But, there are maybe other ways to do that. And you hear those two women speak, and they're kind of saying, in a way, more of those would be useful.
More of those would be good.
Yeah.
So again, that difference between welcoming and inclusion. 2 years, that struck me, 2 years to feel comfortable.
A long time.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a long time to wonder where I sit. And again, you're going through all the machinations of immigration, the process. That's stressful. So add on all these layers of stresses, maybe a new language in some cases, finding home, finding work.
It's incredible when you think about it.
Yeah, when you think about the effort, really difficult time. So again, when we heard Leanne Kavanaugh say, here's some things we can do. Here, to your point, Janet, are some things we can do.
Absolutely. That's what we need, right? The conversation's great. Don't get me wrong. And I think it's a starting point, but there are some action items. And those two women gave us some and told us what we need to do as leaders in our community. And easy access, right? It's an easy thing to start with, to make life better for those who are transitioning to our community.
Yeah, to be welcomed and to be included. I'm looking forward to this last chapter of this segment because they go a little deeper, and the theme of it is, this is my home. And so we're going to get a flavor for how Canada has become their home and what that means. And then we're going to wrap it all up and close it out. So let's take a listen. What could neighbors in the community do to be helpful in welcoming newcomers? Maybe this time, Gemma, I'll start with you. What can we do to be more welcoming and engaging?
I really appreciate this question, Roz, and only because I think about it so much. I think one of the best things that any neighbor or employer can do is that integration piece. It's one thing to welcome someone and say, we're really happy to have you in our community. And here's my distinction between the two. It's really nice to have you in our community. If you think of anything, just give me a call. I'm right, a phone call away. And that is wonderful. And I do appreciate the sentiment. But however, what I've found is even better is if you take me by the hand and say, Gemma, you're new to the community. I think you need to meet Roz. You need to meet Nev, and let me make the introduction. So rather than, I don't know, like Nev, you can probably appreciate this. When you came to the area 2 years after you got to Canada, you would not know what to think that you would need or call someone for. But if they could think about, tell me, when is garbage day? Do we get garbage picked up? I'm out in the country. What should I be doing? Oh, I have to take my garbage to the dump. Okay, those types of conversations. But really integrating and that invitation to be part of the community. And I think that's where the difference to welcoming and integration is. So one of the examples I have is the same community that we moved in on the farm. Our neighbors, within a couple of months, we were planning for the Belmont Maple Syrup Festival, and they called us and said, oh, by the way, our area, we deal with, we're doing this year, and what would you like to do? Not, we would like you to be there if you can make it, think about it. The question was out and very forward. What would you like to do? And so our family, we had 3 children and my husband and I. And since that day to the last time we had the festival, we have volunteered at that festival. And so immediately our children became part of the community, and they met the other children that were going to be part of the festival. And so it's really making sure that we are taking care of the people that come into our community and don't really know what's happening. So, those conversations that happen over food, Nev, or a coffee or a cookie, those are the things that really make you feel part of what that community does. And rather than hearing it third hand, it's really nice to have someone who will call you and say, Nev, we're having trivia night tonight. We'd love for you and Mike to come out. What time shall we pick you up? Or something of that nature, rather than saying, Nev, it's we've got trivia night. We'd love for you to come.
As we talk about humanizing our differences, there are no differences in settling into a new community, in a sense of, we all need to know when the garbage gets picked up. We know where to get our mail, where the school stop is, all that. So really, I hear, be a good neighbor.
Yes.
Because you help a lot of people who are newcomers as well. What do you tell them to ask for or to be aware of?
Well, I kind of comparing to 24 years ago when we moved to the area and seeing how, actually I'm only translating, but I have been seeing lots of it's a huge difference, Ross, since ever since I came to what I see the group at from the church helping the new refugees in Godrich. It's amazing. They're doing all what Gemma said. Like it's an above and beyond, like providing all it's amazing help. Like not only language and babysitting and with food and where is everything, like mentoring every step on the way. So they kind of have been lots of background education, or like they educated themselves, they put in their mind they wanted to do that. So it's very intentional. I was so impressed. But one thing I want to add for integration, we could do all of this. It takes two parties as well. There is a difference between like this newcomer to the community. It depends. I want to say there is a difference between immigration and say refugee. Not in the sense of the paperwork and stuff like that, but the mentality as well. Like as an immigrant, we decided to do that. Like Gemma decided as 19 years old to come and start new life. We chose to come to Canada. Not everybody chose to come to Canada. As like it's wonderful if they just know that they landed a wonderful opportunity. But some people come having lots of baggage, and they didn't actually want to leave, probably, or they forced it to leave. And also, one more thing we have to know as helper, like being on the other side, being in the community now, and you need to know their what they are scared of, because what they come with is not in their mind about our communities could be totally wrong. If we like kind of understand their background as much as possible, that will help us a lot, help them like overcome their fears about what they could facing. So that's what I'm saying, like being a good neighbor is wonderful, but also you need it's great, and I have seen it happening and got these people, and this is actually what got the people who are scared of being in our communities out of the shells, because they're saying, oh, we did figure this out wrong. Like they're here to help. They're here to help without want anything. Like, you know, it just, you need to understand where they came from first, just because we are different as humans as well, but our circumstances to mandate how we think or how we receive the new opportunities as well.
I really appreciated what you just said, and echo Roz's words, profound, because we think about it in other ways. I have never thought about it in that way of a refugee and being scared, and this is not where I really want to be. I'm not here, but wow. Thank you.
Yeah, that was helpful. In the sense that, again, just as though if we were to go to another country, we have ideas in our head about what that country is. We've been told things, we've maybe read things, they may not be accurate. So just knowing we maybe have to start at the beginning, and that's a good place to start. I am in awe of what you've shared. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that, and I'll go back to each of you, that you would really want people to know about coming to a community like Huron County or a rural area like this to help, whether it be a refugee or someone choosing an immigrant, to be welcoming and to put the best foot forward to make this a great place to say you are wanted? What would you say to people? Any last thoughts? Maybe start with Gemma this time.
Sure. The word that keeps coming to my mind is empathy, and really suspending judgment. And like you said, Roz, for everyone that you meet, I think of, we all have heard stories about, you know, whether it be immigrants, refugees, new people to our region. We need to also think that, I think we need to change our thinking around what are the strengths that all of our new people coming into our region are bringing, but also what are the strengths that our people that live here bring. Sometimes we disregard people who are already in our community and we don't pay them attention. So I think empathy, suspending judgment, but really looking for all the best parts of people that we can find, as opposed to sometimes the thinking that we tend to, the fallback position. I really want us to think about that.
The best parts and all the strengths that everyone brings. I love that. Nev, last thoughts for you.
Introduce our Canadian values as well. Our Canadian, like we are very inclusive, like we include everybody. And some people came from background that does not include everybody. Like this is, we have a lot to offer. Like, we don't have also to change the fabric of our community to be Egyptian or to be Syrian or to be like, we don't have to do anything. Just be ourselves. This is not the idea. Empathy doesn't mean we have to create another Egypt or another Syria or but people come here to live here. So maybe language is a very important thing. You don't have to worry about all the other stuff. If you start with the language as well, everything else is going to fall in place. You're going to understand about us better. So language is one of the most important thing, I would say. And offer our Canadian values. We include everybody, and we will teach people to include everybody else regardless.
Everyone, I've been chatting with Nev and Gemma, and we've been getting an appreciation for welcoming newcomers to our neighborhood and those who have been here for quite some time, and what they would tell others and what they would tell those doing the welcoming. And I've learned a tremendous amount, and my heart is full after this conversation. And join us for more as we continue this discussion on humanizing our differences. Welcome back, everyone. That was the fourth chapter of Humanizing Our Differences, the first segment. This is our home, and that was Gemma and Nev. And Rand, it always seems to come back to food.
It's food and culture for me.
Yeah.
If you want to trick a racist into having respect for another culture, and you show them things that they already like that are about that culture, how can they stay racist? This is the part, of course, they do, but you know what I mean? There are so many things that would be actionable, valuable, even just for a selfish person that you would say, these things are good for me. I don't know how you can't be pulled in by that or attracted to that.
Curious, and again, when we say we break bread, that's where relationships start, right? We talk over a plate of food, we share, we get into our backgrounds, we learn that we both had hopes and fears and challenges.
Well, something that someone made with their hands, you take it from their hands and you put it in your body. Like it's very deep.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine, listening to them talk and the way they described different events or whatever. Like I made the comment about engagement structures. And to me, that's what's really resonating is what are the opportunities for groups of people who are disparate to come together? What are those common things? Food and culture really jumps into my head.
Jana, if we turn to you again, as they went down the road a little further, what jumped out at you?
There's a couple of things. First of all, it keeps coming back to the importance of relationships, right? And that it's an intertwined relationship to be able to give and take. And so you hear that. I also, it's remarkable how positive the experience has been for these two women. And that gives me hope because I don't believe that everybody's experience has been as positive, but theirs has been, and then they can shed light on some of the things that can change. And then for me, because this is something I've been thinking a lot about, and specifically with regards to some children that I know, and it is about the difference in the experiences of newcomers, and especially in Goderich, recognizing that some people are refugees and they didn't have a choice. And when they mentioned baggage and how much a lot of people maybe are carrying, and I wonder about supports and how to if language is a barrier and then we have potential trauma, how to make sure that these newcomers can feel like they're embraced by their community, because that would be an awful lot. And I think about the young people in my school community and how much they've had to go through versus what an average teen from Goderich maybe has experienced. I'm hopeful that based on what they've been saying, that people are reaching out and that people are embracing and having a connected relationship and providing an outlet and providing safety. It was interesting to hear the mention of, fears and making sure we understand what a newcomer to our community might be afraid of, so that then maybe we can help them get over that fear and feel safe in their community.
Yeah, I was humbled by that as well, and the distinction between, as a newcomer, am I choosing to immigrate or is the choice being made for me? And there are so many circumstances we can't even fathom in terms of what is going on in various nations that might produce that need to leave your country against your want. And that's tough, and that really resonated with me, Rand. Last thoughts before we close out and I wrap it up for the night.
I'm just remembering 79, 80 when kids came from Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos and those countries, and the ignorance, like, I don't mean that in a negative, we had no idea. And this community really has had a history of people coming from somewhere else and either coming and going or weaving themselves into the community. And hopefully we keep taking those opportunities to make ourselves stronger, and hopefully we're always welcoming and bringing more people in. I mean, it's the way we grow, right?
It's a journey, and I think we go back to Nita's words, right? Which is, we just have to start somewhere, and state of grace, right? Places filled with grace. Jana, last thoughts.
It's exactly that, the idea of spaces of grace and of being able to be vulnerable, to have these conversations, and to know that it's okay. My last thoughts are that this here this evening and these segments are amazing, because they're opening doors for the conversation, and they're making us be able to sit in discomfort and maybe look at our systems and our current practices and try to make change to not just be a welcoming community, but to be inclusive. And it gives me a lot of hope. I think this is the future. This is going to bring change to our communities, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
That's what, Rand.
I just have to say, she sounds like a person of depth, and I sound like somebody that wants food from other nations. Like, this is the takeaway.
I'll take food.
We definitely upgraded with Jana. I'm not going to lie.
Thank God that Jana's here.
Yeah, that's
or
right.
Else
that's
it
right.
would be, I just, it's so easy to say.
She's getting paid and you're not. That's probably, yeah.
It's just so easy to say foolish things. You seem very well considered about this, but you have no choice, right? You're an administrator in a school, and you're always faced with these issues, and it's so easy for some of us to sit in a bubble where we are choosing the conditions that we're meeting people of other cultures, or we're meeting diversity. And so I'm just aware of that as I sit here. I sound like a goof compared to you.
Well, I'm going to give you another chance because you're coming back with me next week. And I hope everyone else comes back and joins us same time, 7:30 next Thursday. I want to thank you to Hay Communications and for Huron for broadcasting on Channel 1. I hope for those who've been watching on the Staysh on Facebook Live and on our YouTube channel, we appreciate those, and for your comments. And we want to once again thank Huron County Immigration Partnership for partnering with Full Pop Media in producing this series, and of course, Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada for their generous support in producing this series. Of course, I want to thank Jana Baer-Smith. You have just been a treat. We thank you for your wisdom. We thank you for your vulnerability and your insights. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And Rand, I appreciate you, guy.
Scott, there's got to be somebody.
There's got to be someone.
And there she is.
There we are. Well, everyone, it's been a joy for us to be part of this series. We're coming back at you next week. Don't forget to share your comments, and hyper local for you always from the Staysh.